They thought he was just another inmate to humiliate, until they saw him fight death the way only a soldier can. And when they learned who he really was, justice finally woke up. The alarm was still screaming when Caleb Brooks dropped to his knees beside the man who wanted him dead 2 days ago. Smoke pushed under the laundry room door like a dark tide, thick and oily, turning the air into something a person could drown in without water. Men coughed and cursed and looked for orders that weren't coming. When authority runs, a room looks for whoever is still standing. Caleb's shirt was torn, one sleeve burned where he'd used it to clear the vent. His hands were already blackened at the knuckles. The paper star his son had folded for him slipped from his pocket as he leaned into the body on the floor. It spun once, catching the dim light as if trying to signal someone who cared. No one dared speak. Even the men who hated him watched with wide eyes. Rooker lay on the tile, big chest barely moving, pale where hate usually painted him red. Smoke had found his lungs first, poison rushing into old scar tissue from a life lived burning bridges and whatever else he could set fire to. His eyes rolled back, lips already losing color. Caleb pressed 2 fingers to the thick neck and didn't bother counting. He knew the danger by the silence under skin. "Roll him," Caleb said, his voice low but steady, not loud, not angry, but the kind of voice that rooms obey because they hear history inside it. Santi scrambled to help, his hands shaking. Together they turned the man on his side. The air made a sick little rattle in Rooker's throat. Caleb wiped the soot from his mouth with the edge of his own shirt, then tilted the jaw just so, a move he hadn't practiced in a long time, one his muscles remembered even if the world tried to make him forget. Vega, the young guard, stood there frozen with a radio in his white-knuckled fist. He looked at Caleb like someone seeing a stranger step out of an old photograph. Caleb didn't look back at him. "Open that vent 2 inches, Caleb said. "There's fire," Vega started. 2 inches, Caleb repeated. "We don't feed it." The words landed like a slap of sense. Vega moved. Caleb tore strips from his state-issued shirt and handed them out. "Breathe through this. Slow. Stay low." He wasn't asking. He was building calm brick by brick in a room collapsing under fear. Rooker's chest seized, then stalled. Caleb was on top of him in the next breath, hands placed center sternum like he was knocking on a door. He pushed hard and even, counting only inside his head. Smoke burned into his throat, tears forming without permission. But his rhythm did not break. His mind snapped back to a desert, to a night where good men begged the sky for one more breath, and he swore to keep them here a little longer. Rooker's head fell limp. Someone whispered a prayer they didn't believe in. Caleb sealed his mouth over the man's and breathed life into a body that had once spat on him. Then again. The chest rose, fell, paused. He listened with his cheek near the jaw. Mouth, barely anything there but a flicker. "Come on," he said softly, as if coaxing a stubborn child. "You're not done yet." Rooker's pulse kicked once beneath Caleb's fingers, weak but trying. Caleb counted compressions, kept the pace. The star on the floor glimmered in the smoke light, a reminder that somewhere outside this concrete world was a little boy waiting for his father to come home. 1 and 2 and 3. The alarm hiccuped, then died into a stunned hush, replaced by the low rumble of boots and distant shouts. The room drew in a breath together and did not release it. Rooker's chest expanded on its own. His eyes opened, wild and confused, like an animal wounded by the idea it needed help. He stared straight into the face of the man he had tried to break. Caleb stared back, his hands still poised above the ribs, ready to keep fighting if the breath faltered again. Caleb tapped 2 fingers lightly against Rooker's chest. Then a third. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. The rhythm of reassurance he used once to calm a child afraid of storms. The men closest saw it, and something in them shifted, quiet as dust settling on a forgotten Bible. Vega's voice shook on the radio. Laundry. We've got a man down, but someone's stabilizing him, he stammered. Brooks, Caleb Brooks, he knows what he's doing. He's trained. Static crackled. Then a distant voice answered with urgency Caleb hadn't heard since he wore boots and carried kits meant to keep the dying among the living. Vega's hand lowered, his eyes never leaving Caleb. He wasn't seeing an inmate anymore. He was seeing a medic. The smoke curled around them. Testing. The building groaned like a ship hit broadside. But for one held breath of time, the world stopped its spinning just to witness one strange, impossible thing. A black man saving the life of the racist who wanted to erase his name and his dignity. Rooker's breath shuddered. His fingers twitched, reaching for something solid. Caleb steadied the shoulder without hesitation. Men who had cheered violence 2 days ago now stared like schoolboys caught misbehaving, ashamed and fascinated all at once. Someone whispered, "Holy hell." Someone else muttered, Why is he helping him?" The question hung in the smoky air like a verdict. Caleb looked back down at the man, gasping under his hands. All he saw was a life trying to stay here. That was enough. Outside, heavy metal slammed open. The rescue team was near. But inside that laundry room, for a heartbeat that stretched long enough to change the shape of a man's future, there was no laughter, no hate, no bravado. There was only breathing and silence. A silence thick with the weight of suddenly knowing the truth. He saved the racist who beat him. And seconds later, everyone went silent. They made a circle around him long before he understood he was the center of the day's entertainment. Chow hall noise usually rose like steam, trays clattering, boots dragging, that nervous laughter men make to forget where they are. But this morning, sound gathered into something sharper. It aimed itself. Rooker stepped out of the line, carrying his swagger like a flag. Red hair cropped close, jaw tight with the confidence of a man who'd never had to look over his shoulder. His boys followed, wide shoulders and bad decisions, ready to cheer whatever cruelty he invented. The guard near the door, Breen, leaned back against the wall and scratched his chin, pretending to inspect a poster about grievance rights. His eyes said he already knew how this would unfold. Caleb set his tray down on the end of a long table, smoothing the cardboard edge of the napkin like it mattered. Eggs lukewarm, grits stiff enough to patch concrete, milk that always tasted a day too tired. He lifted his head when the voices dipped low. Silence is a predator here. You feel it stalk up behind you before it bites. Well, Rooker said, voice loud enough to claim the whole room. Preacher man showed up again. He wasn't a preacher, but in a place like this, quiet gets mistaken for prayer. Caleb didn't respond. He had learned long ago that the first reply is the first step into somebody else's fire. Rooker moved closer, crowd parting for him like he was Moses of the damned. Say something, he said, bumping Caleb's shoulder with his own. I'm talking to you. The men nearby stopped chewing. A spoon froze in midair. Santi, the kid from laundry, stood several feet back, but his worry reached across the space like a hand. Caleb kept his eyes on the strip of floor between Rooker's boots. The tiles were cracked into maps of places they would never walk again. Rooker's hand shot out and grabbed the pocket on Caleb's shirt, fingers curling around a soft square of paper inside. He ripped it free and stepped back to see what prize he'd taken. A photograph. A child, missing a tooth but smiling wide, holding a scruffy dog that looked like it had won the lottery. The picture was bent at the corners from being looked at too many times. Rooker held it the way someone holds a clue to another man's heart. "Well now," he said slowly, "what do we have here?" Caleb's throat tightened. His hands twitched at his sides, but he made them stay still. "Cute kid," Rooker went on, squinting at the image as if he might find the weakness printed small somewhere. "Yours?" Caleb nodded once. Rooker grinned, a cruel little crescent of teeth. "He got your eyes. Poor boy." Then he raised the photo by the top edge and pinched, ready to tear. Caleb stepped forward fast, but not reckless. His voice came out steady, a single warning held in check. "Don't." Breen's voice cut in, lazy and sharp. "Easy, Brooks. Pictures are property of the institution once they're in the facility. He's just inspecting state materials." The guard smirked like he'd said something clever. "The hell he is," Santi muttered under his breath, taking a step forward. Another inmate shoved him back without looking. Rooker wiggled the picture and laughed as the room leaned closer, hungry for some spectacle to make them forget their own cages. "All that silence," he said. "I think it means you think you're better than us." He tapped the photo against Caleb's cheek. "Say you're nothing here." Caleb inhaled slow, like he was measuring oxygen. His eyes lifted, not angry, not afraid, just tired in a way that comes from living too long with other people's ignorance. "You done?" he asked. The laughter cracked back, alive. Rooker's face flushed, pride bruised deeper than his knuckles ever had been. He slapped the photo hard against Caleb's chest, then snatched it away again. "Wrong answer." The smack came next, open palm but full of message. The sound echoed against steel and concrete, big as a gunshot. Caleb's head snapped to the side, and the room exhaled in one satisfied hiss. Caleb steadied himself with one hand on the table, fingers landing between a dry biscuit and a plastic fork. He swallowed blood and the urge to swing. Not here, not now. Anger isn't a weapon, it's bait. Rooker leaned in close, breath reeking of instant coffee and cheap bravado. "Look at me when I talk to you." Caleb's gaze stayed down, eyes on the cracks. Count them. Don't let the cracks start inside. "You ain't got a voice here," Rooker said, slow like he was teaching a child. "No past, no future." He lifted the photo again. "Only what I say you have." A soft plea slipped from someone near the back. "Let him be, man." The voice didn't carry far. Caleb's jaw clenched once more. He forced the words out low. "You done yet?" Rooker shoved him so hard he slammed into the steel edge of the table. Food jumped, trays rattled, a milk carton toppled and rolled away in a panic. A ripple of laughter shivered through the men watching because cruelty gives them a way to feel alive. Breen finally stepped forward, taking his time. "All right, break it up," he said, tone flat as concrete. But he didn't reach for Rooker, didn't even look his way. He stared only at Caleb, like the problem had always been him. Rooker smiled as he backed away, dropping the photograph at Caleb's feet like trash. "Next time, preacher," he said, "you'll say it." Men drifted off, pretending they weren't still thrilled. The hum of fluorescence filled the quiet. Santi knelt quickly, grabbed the picture before a boot could grind it into memory. He handed it to Caleb without meeting his eyes. "You good?" he asked. Caleb nodded and took the photo gently, brushing the edge with his thumb. There was a crease now across the child's smile. Abba smoothed it the best he could. Santi whispered, "He hates anyone who don't bow." Then he stepped back because safety here meant disappearing before someone noticed you cared. Caleb slipped the photo back into his pocket and steadied himself with a slow breath in, longer breath out. He stared at the place Rooker's fist had touched, not because it hurt, but because it reminded him of something important. Hate is loud, but dignity, when it fights back, doesn't raise its voice. He picked up his spoon. The eggs were cold now. The day was colder, but he ate. Because you survive a place like this one small swallow at a time, refusing to give them anything they can turn into a weapon. Behind him, Breen muttered something under his breath to the guards by the door, and they laughed. Caleb didn't need to hear the words to know they were about him. In here, they had already decided he was nothing. He chewed, eyes on the clock that was 2 minutes slow, counting the seconds until he could hear a voice on the other end of a phone line say, "Daddy?" He didn't know the call would be taken from him later that day. He didn't know the trouble wasn't done yet. He only knew one thing, the promise he made every morning when the doors slammed open and a new fight began. Breathe steady. Don't feed the fire. And keep the picture safe. Because some things were worth walking through hell to protect. Laundry was supposed to be the quiet part of the day. Machines doing the talking, steam rising like ghosts trying to escape this place before the men inside could. Caleb liked it that way. In here, he could fold corners and straighten seams and pretend that putting order into fabric meant putting order into the world, even if just a sliver. Santi worked beside him, humming without noticing, some old tune that had survived more cigarettes than birthdays. The kid was quick, bones still growing into the size of his hope. He glanced at Caleb every so often, like checking that the man who refused to break was still real. "You always that calm?" Santi asked, voice low so it wouldn't travel far. Caleb folded a sheet into thirds and lined up the edges. "Storms blow themselves out if you don't feed them," he said. "Yeah," Santi muttered, elbow on a basket. "But Rooker, that man's a storm that brings his own wind." Caleb didn't respond. He reached for another towel. He counted his breaths. 4 in, 4 hold, 6 out. The habit had saved men in places where the sky tried to crush them. Now it saved him from a man who thought he owned the air in this room. The dryer banged loud, like a fist against a locked door. Caleb flinched before he could stop himself. Old reflex. His hand brushed the pocket of his shirt where the star Eli made was tucked safe, edges soft now from holding. He let his thumb rest on it for a second, grounding himself in a promise that wasn't welcome here but refused to leave. The clock on the wall ticked toward the hour that meant phone calls. He felt time squeezing his ribs. Today was supposed to be his turn. One short conversation to remind a little boy that his father wasn't lost. One small lifeline pulled taut across miles of concrete and barbed wire. He checked his watch, worn face, cracked glass, then checked the stacks he'd finished. Enough to turn in, enough to earn that call. Vega showed up at the doorway, scanning the room like a man looking for a reason to belong somewhere. He paused when his eyes found Caleb. Something flickered in that look. Curiosity, maybe respect, maybe just confusion at a puzzle that didn't solve like the rest. Caleb nodded once. Vega nodded back, subtle like a secret. Then Breen walked in. He stank of authority used wrong, that smirk pasted on his face like it had tenure. He held a clipboard, but it was only decoration. His voice carried over the thrum of machines with the confidence of a man who wrote the rules for the sake of breaking them. "Brooks," Breen called out. "Phone time's off today. System glitch." Caleb froze a moment too long. Santi looked over with a pity that hit harder than any shove. "Glitch again?" the kid muttered, shaking his head. Caleb kept his tone respectful, maybe more respectful than the man deserved. "Sir, I'm scheduled." It's been... He stopped himself before emotion could show. You never give them that. It's important. Not my problem, Breen said, flipping a page that didn't need flipping. Take it up with administration, or write Santa Claus, might get a quicker reply. Several inmates snorted laughter. One of them was Tucker, camera phone king and amateur director of misery. He lifted his chin like he'd just filmed the scene. Caleb wondered if humiliation ever got too old to watch. He doubted it. Breen stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Caleb and the machines could hear. Man like you shouldn't be calling home anyhow. Got nothing good to report. His gaze sharpened. Maybe somebody should tell your boy the truth. Daddy's not coming back. Something in Caleb's chest shrank hard. His breath shuddered once before he caught it in his fist. He pictured Eli's asthma inhaler on the nightstand at home, the little boy practicing slow breaths like his dad taught him. He pictured the promise. 3 knocks on the phone line so Eli would know it was really him. He swallowed the ache down deep where Breen couldn't reach. Santi kicked a basket leg, anger flashing bright. Caleb gave him a small look that said, "Don't, I can take it." Breen smiled like he'd won a prize. Get back to folding. He tapped the clipboard against his thigh, like banging a gavel. You're nothing special here, Brooks. The guard turned to leave, but Rooker arrived first. He filled the doorway with his shadow, knuckles scraped fresh from something he'd enjoyed. His boys stacked behind him, eager to be needed. Rooker scanned the room like he was choosing where to carve his next message. The heat from the dryers made sweat bead along his neck, glistening like oil. Look who's got his own corner, Rooker said, stepping toward Caleb. Man thinks he's got a job. A place. He picked up a stack of perfectly folded shirts and tossed them to the floor with a laugh. Fabric scattered like startled birds. Caleb crouched to gather them. Slow, no sudden moves, he breathed. The room's tension thickened into something you could chew. Rooker crouched too, but not to help. His hand darted out, and before Caleb could block it, the man drove a laundry hook into the side of Caleb's palm. Not deep, not enough to hospitalize, but enough to bleed. Enough to mark. Caleb hissed and jerked back, clutching his hand against his stomach. A smear of red spotted the fresh-pressed shirts. Infection waiting to happen. Well, Rooker said, rising to stand tall again. Look who bleeds like the rest of us. Santi shoved forward before fear could catch him. Back off. One of Rooker's boys grabbed the kid by the collar and shoved him into a table so hard bottles rattled. Vega took a half step like he might finally intervene, but Breen's voice came sharp behind him. Stand down, Vega. You didn't see anything. The rookie froze, duty wrestling decency across his face. Caleb stood slowly. He pressed the hanzao wound tight with a scrap of cloth. Pain flared, but he used it like a nail to pin his composure in place. He locked eyes with Rooker, not challenging, not begging, but seeing. Really seeing. The insecurity behind the cruelty, the fear behind the bluster. You done? Caleb asked. It was the same question, but this time there was something different under it. Rooker stared for a beat, confused by a man who didn't play the role he'd been assigned. Then he shoved Caleb hard against the table once more, knocking the wind from his lungs. Not by a long shot, he said. We got more lessons coming. He turned and left, his pack following, laughing loud because the quiet scared them. Breen gave Caleb one last look, slow, measuring, hungry to see if he'd broken anything that mattered, then walked away with a kind of swagger you only borrow from someone more dangerous. Santi rushed to Caleb's side. You okay, man? You're bleeding? Caleb nodded, though the room tilted for a second. "Grab another towel," he said softly. "Hot wash. Soap heavy. They don't deserve clean shirts after what they—" "It's not for them," Caleb cut in gently. "It's for the men who need them." He pressed harder on the wound to stop the bleeding. "Don't let someone else's hate decide how you do your job." Santi stared like he was learning a new word. Caleb exhaled slow, tasting metal and disappointment. One day, he told himself. One day he'd hear Eli's voice again. One day he wouldn't have to count cracks on the floor to keep from breaking. But not today. Today, he just had to survive. He tucked his son's star deeper into his pocket, clutching it carefully so it wouldn't crease more than it already had. Somewhere far away, a little boy would be holding his inhaler, breathing slow, waiting for 3 knocks. Caleb wiped his palm clean, set his jaw, and went back to folding towels. Because dignity, like faith, sometimes came disguised as routine, and surviving another hour in this place was its own kind of prayer. Vega sat in the security booth long after his shift should have ended, the fluorescent lights buzzing above him like a bad conscience. Paperwork lay scattered across the desk, incident forms, intake logs, transfers. But the file in front of him wasn't part of today's duties. It was one he'd pulled because something about that tall, quiet man folding sheets like he was saving the world one crease at a time had stuck under Vega's skin. He flipped the manila folder open again, eyes moving over the lines that were supposed to describe a life. Theft, resisting arrest, aggravated assault resulting in death. The words didn't match the man who had steadied a panicking kid and saved the guard who froze when smoke flooded the room. Something was wrong here. 2 versions of a truth fighting for space. He checked the date on the intake form. 2 months earlier. Transferred from a federal holding facility out of state. No detail on why. That alone was a flag. The military discharge records were attached, but blank in the sections where commendations or deployment history should have been. Someone had scrubbed this file clean. Not sloppy. Professional. Intentionally empty. Vega leaned back in the plastic chair and rubbed the back of his neck. He remembered the way Caleb had moved in the smoke. Precise, calm, like he'd trained his whole body to be the anchor in a room full of panic. He'd seen men in uniform carry that same stillness back when he worked jobs that paid better and demanded more. He'd lost friends overseas who had that look in their eyes, half here, half in a place they'd never really left behind. The booth door creaked open. Vega snapped the file shut too quickly, like a kid hiding a comic book from a teacher. Breen stepped inside, his shadow sliding across the floor like spilled ink. "What are you doing in here?" Breen asked, gaze darting to the folder. "Just finishing the shift log," Vega lied, clearing his throat. Breen's smirk spread slow across his face. "You're new, so let me give you a pointer. Don't waste your time trying to understand these animals. They're where they belong." He tapped the desk with 2 fingers, too close to the file for comfort. "Especially that one." Vega kept his voice steady. "Brooks helped control the fire earlier. He saved Rooker's life. Saved all of ours, if we're honest." Breen laughed like he'd heard the world's simplest joke. "Brooks is a convict. A good one knows his place. That's all." He stepped closer, voice dropping to a growl that smelled like sour coffee. "Stay away from his file. It's above your pay grade." The threat was clean as a razor, and Vega heard all the words Breen didn't say. He watched the man leave, boots thudding like a judge stamping a fate onto stone. Vega exhaled, long and slow, the air tasting like something rotten just passed by. Outside the booth, the corridor stretched quiet, bars graphing out a life, sentence in every line. Vega thought about his father, who used to say a man earns his uniform every single day he puts it on. He wondered what kind of man Breen had earned himself into being. The next morning, laundry resumed, as if humiliation had an expiration date. Caleb worked with his wounded hand, wrapped in a strip of brown paper towel, tape barely holding. He tucked his thumb to hide the blood stains seeping through. Infection was a luxury for later. Order came first. He folded sheets like discipline was all he had left to guard. Santi approached with fresh towels under his arm, trying to look casual and failing. "You sure you don't need the nurse?" he asked. Caleb shook his head. "Seen worse," he said. Santi hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket. A small envelope, creased and stamped with a green dinosaur sticker in the corner. He held it out like offering contraband. "I found this on Breen's desk yesterday. I think it's yours." Caleb's breath stopped. He recognized the childish loop of handwriting even before his fingers brushed the paper. Eli. The envelope was sealed, unopened. Breen had never intended to give it to him. "What's it say?" Santi asked carefully. Caleb didn't open it, didn't dare. He traced the outline of the sticker with his thumb and closed his eyes just long enough to steady himself. Not here. Footsteps approached. Caleb tucked the envelope into his waistband under the shirt. The wound in his palm throbbed beneath the pressure. Pain reminded him he was still alive. Vega entered, eyes scanning the room, careful not to rest too long on Caleb. He walked to the log sheet clipped near the dryers and signed his name. No mention of last night. But when he turned to leave, he paused just within Caleb's earshot. "You did good yesterday," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Caleb didn't look up. "I did my job," he replied. Vega nodded once, something like respect flickering in his eyes, before he moved on. The rest of the shift dragged forward, but the air had changed. Every man in the room had watched a truth slip out from under the mask this place tried to force on Caleb. It made some curious, it made others angry. Fear hides behind violence, and nothing scared men like Rooker more than someone who refused to belong to the story they wrote about him. Rooker showed up again before the lunch whistle. Alone this time, which made him more dangerous. He stopped in front of Caleb, close enough the heat from the dryers made sweat bead on both of them. "You think you're a hero now?" Rooker asked. Caleb didn't stop folding. "I think you're still breathing," he said. Rooker's jaw twitched. "I don't owe you a damn thing. I didn't ask for anything." "That's the problem," Rooker snapped. "A man like you should know his place." Caleb paused then, finally looked him in the eye. "I know exactly where I am. I also know this place doesn't get to decide who I am." Rooker stepped forward, aggression thickening the air. Caleb braced, expecting a shove or a swing. Instead, Rooker grabbed the shirt Caleb was folding and ripped it from his hands, throwing it to the ground. "You're gonna learn," Rooker said. "Everybody here learns." Caleb stared at the ruined shirt for a beat, then bent down and picked it up. Slow, purposeful, refusing the script. Rooker sneered at that refusal, then stalked away because nothing irritates a bully more than a target that won't play. When the whistle blew, Caleb stayed behind to clean the mess. The envelope pressed against his hip with every step, reminding him what Breen was trying to take. He thought of Eli holding his tiny inhaler, working so hard just to draw a good breath. 3 knocks. Slow breath. "You're safe. Daddy's here." Caleb slipped the letter into his shoe for safekeeping. It didn't belong to the prison. It didn't belong to Breen. It was a piece of the world that still believed in him. He walked toward the exit, the ache in his hand in rhythm with his heartbeat. On the way out, he stopped by the sink, turned the water on, and watched blood swirl pink down the drain. He cleaned the cut as best he could, the sting sharp but grounding. He'd endured worse in dirt and sand far from home. He'd endured worse in courtrooms where nobody cared if he'd tried to save a life they insisted he'd taken. He dried his hand, squared his shoulders, and looked at his reflection in the small, cracked mirror above the sink. A prisoner's clothes, a medic's eyes, a father's hope. Somebody had tried to erase his past, but they hadn't succeeded. The truth lived in his hands, in his training, in every breath he chose to take without hate. As he walked back to the tier, Vega watched him from a distance. Breen watched from the shadows. Rooker watched from behind bars. 3 men, 3 motives. And Caleb knew, without a doubt, that the real danger was only beginning. The day unraveled the way bad days like to. Slow at first, then all at once. It started with a rumor. Someone saw Tucker grinning at his phone longer than usual during yard break, like he'd won a bet only he knew he placed. Word traveled that a video from Chow Hall had slipped past the firewalls and landed online. Not just online, viral, before the prison even felt the heat. Caleb didn't know that yet. He only felt the tension. Eyes that usually slid off him now stuck a little longer. Men whispered when he walked by, curious, confused, offended that he hadn't asked their permission to be more than the role they'd written for him. The laundry room was hotter than usual, steam clinging to the walls like sweat on a boxer. He stacked towels until his palms throbbed under the bandage. Work steadies the heart, he told himself. Work remembers who you are. Santi came barreling in, out of breath. Man, you seen Tucker's page? They talking about you. Caleb paused, towel hanging in midair. Talking what? That clip from Chow, him smacking you around. People in the comments are tearing Rooker apart, calling him a bigot, calling Breen crooked, saying this place should be shut down. Santi's eyes were bright, hopeful in a dangerous way. This could change things. Caleb felt his stomach drop. Hope in here was like gasoline. Powerful, but if you didn't handle it right, you burned the whole building down. It could get people hurt, he said. Before Santi could argue, a siren blared down the hallway. Sharp, sudden, angry. Red lights flashed overhead. The PA sputtered to life. Code red, all units, tier lockdown. Possible breach in. Static drowned the rest. The dryers rattled like they felt the fear crawling up their metal bones. Breen stormed into the laundry room, face flushed, jaw locked. He looked like a man who'd been cornered by the consequences he thought he buried. Everyone against the walls, he barked. Get down and shut up. Vega entered moments later, but his panic looked different. Less mean, more scared of doing the wrong thing. Smoke rolled under the door like a tongue tasting its next meal. The smell of burning oil hit hard, sharp enough to sting the back of the nose. Fire in North Tier, someone shouted from the hall. We lost 2 guards already. The laundry room erupted, men scrambling, cursing, pushing for air. The old CO dropped his gas mask, hands shaking so badly he couldn't even bend down to pick it up. Tucker stood frozen, the glow of his phone gone now, replaced by the reality that sometimes you poke the wrong beast. Rooker shoved his way in with his boys, chest heaving, not from the fight, but from the wheeze that lived deep in his lungs. His swagger cracked. He coughed once, then again, each one sharper, taking more than it gave. Caleb saw everything at once, the smoke rising faster, the fear catching like sparks on dry grass, the guards arguing whether to open the door or barricade it, the panic learning how to sprint. He could smell the fire gaining ground. He understood the geometry of disaster: airflow, time, oxygen. He remembered a room in Kandahar where the only difference between life and bodies was how fast you moved. Caleb grabbed a stack of clean shirts and threw them to the floor. "Wet these," he ordered. His voice wasn't asking permission. It carried weight, and the room felt it. Santi snapped into motion, twisting the faucet open at the utility sink. Water splashed cold over their hands. Men dipped shirts and covered their mouths, instinct following leadership. Breen spun toward Caleb like he'd been insulted. "Who the hell put you in charge?" Caleb didn't look at him. Smoke's coming from the vents. Seal low drafts. Open top vents 2 inches, not 3. 2. He turned to Vega. "Get a wedge in that door so we can get airflow without feeding the fire." Vega hesitated for half a breath, then used his belt buckle to pry the vent just enough. Smoke curled differently then, slipping sideways instead of straight into their lungs. It bought them minutes, maybe 5. Minutes were gold in a room that smelled like dying. Rooker's knees buckled. He grabbed a table edge, breath wheezing like an old accordion left out in the rain. His face went gray around the mouth. Caleb crossed the space before thought could argue. "I don't need..." Rooker gasped. Caleb pressed a damp shirt over his nose. "Everyone needs air," he said. Rooker's eyes widened, not gratitude, not yet, but confusion that a man he'd tried to crush would use his own breath to keep him alive. The smoke thickened. The alarm wailed. A crash echoed somewhere beyond the door. Something big falling. Maybe someone big. Caleb moved through the chaos like it was a dance he'd done too many times. Triage with his eyes. Assess, assign, act. Sit if you're dizzy. Sip water if you have it. Slow breathing. If you panic, you feed the fire in your chest. Breen grabbed his arm. "You're making this worse." Caleb shook him off. "I'm keeping them alive." His voice carried a steel Breen didn't recognize. Authority, experience, truth. Outside, the PA choked out more static. Vega pressed his radio to his ear. "Unit 4, he said, stumbling. "We have 10 inside. Smoke intrusion. No flame contact yet. We're ventilating." The voice on the other end shifted from chaos to purpose. "Hold position. Medical en route." Rooker slumped, coughing tar. Caleb put one hand on his back. "Keep air moving. In, out." He demonstrated with his own lungs, forcing calm into the room. "Don't rush it. Make the air count." Tucker finally snapped out of shock. "This your fault, man." He spat at Caleb. "Your fault this whole thing's going down." Caleb turned, eyes level. The fire was already burning. Some people just didn't smell the smoke in time. Tucker shut up, suddenly aware his phone couldn't protect him from what came next. The door banged. A guard outside shouted they were trying to clear the hall. Vega knelt near the patient who'd collapsed earlier, checking a pulse because he'd seen Caleb do it and wanted to do one right thing. Caleb looked around the room and saw it clearly. This moment, right here, would decide who they remembered as men and who they remembered as animals. He tore the hem off his own shirt and tied it around his face. His hands moved fast despite the wound screaming under the tape. He pointed to the vent. "Watch that draft line. If it pulls harder, fire's closer." Breen leaned against the counter, eyes wild now that he understood. He couldn't cuff his way out of this. His authority was melting faster than the plastic bins in the corner. Caleb glanced once at Rooker, the same man who had stolen his dignity in front of everyone. Now that same man clutched Caleb's makeshift mask like it was borrowed salvation. "You saved me," Rooker whispered, voice shredded by smoke. "We're not finished yet," Caleb said. "Nobody dies in this room today." The room believed him. even Breen. The floor vibrated a second time. Heavier, closer. Lights flickered. Somewhere above, a ceiling tile crashed to the ground, and the men ducked as one organism terrified of becoming debris. Rooker coughed again, but the shirt over his face held. He met Caleb's eyes, desperate for breath, but also something else. An answer to a question he didn't know how to ask. Caleb steadied him with a hand to his shoulder. The fire roared outside like hell itself remembered their names. And for the first time in months, maybe years, these men realized that their survival depended on the one person they had tried hardest to break. The door rattled on its hinges, metal screaming under fists and bodies outside. The hallway was thick with panic. Distant shouts, boots pounding, alarms dying into choking static. Smoke slid beneath the frame like a snake testing for weakness. The room was running out of minutes. Rooker's breathing turned ragged again. Caleb pulled him upright to keep the lungs from collapsing under fear. The man who had spat slurs into his face was now sagging against him like a frightened child, fingers clutching at Caleb's sleeve every time the air thinned. The young guard Vega knelt by the prisoner who'd fallen earlier, his hands shaking as he tried to remember what Caleb had done. "He's not waking up," Vega whispered, voice cracking under the weight of responsibility he wasn't trained for. Caleb moved to the unconscious man without hesitation. "Lift the chin. Check the airway." He slid 2 fingers into the mouth, swept out soot and saliva. The man's chest twitched, then fell still. Smoke started drifting lower. Vision blurred around the edges. Panic rose like heat. Caleb positioned his hands over the sternum, fingers interlocked. He heard another time, another place, dust instead of smoke, screams instead of alarms. He pushed, hard, steady. 1, 2, 3. Ribs bowed under pressure. He knew the sound of life deciding whether to stay or go. He tilted the head, sealed his mouth over the man's, breathed in the promise of tomorrow. The body jerked, coughed up a string of black. The chest rose once more. Men who had never prayed did so quietly now. Vega stared, eyes wide and glistening. "How do you know all this?" Caleb didn't answer. He couldn't waste breath. He grabbed a shirt and tied it tighter over the man's mouth. "Recovery position," he said, rolling him to his side, supporting the jaw like it mattered, because it did. The room watched him move, deliberate and controlled, like each action already lived somewhere deep in his bones. Caleb stood, wiping sweat and soot from his eyes, pulse still locked into the rhythm of saving a life. Breen, clutching his baton, voice trembling despite his attempts to steady it, snapped, "Back away. Let medical handle that when they get here." But he didn't step closer. He didn't know how to fix any of this. His authority was melting just like the plastic bins dripping down the walls. Caleb ignored him. He looked around the room like a commander reviewing his unit. Santi and the others huddled low, masks soaked and pressed to their faces. Caleb moved to the vent, checking that it still breathed enough to keep them alive. The roar outside sounded nearer, like the fire itself was listening. He returned to Rooker, who was trying and failing to keep his posture tough. Sweat trickled down between muscles built from anger. His eyes darted like he expected the darkness to eat him if he blinked too slow. Rooker rasped, struggling with pride as much as oxygen. "I'm fine." Caleb crouched so they were level. "You're not," he said, "but you will be." Rooker flinched at the gentleness. It didn't fit the script he'd written for this enemy. A heavy thud slammed against the door. Vega rushed over, leaning close. "They're coming," he shouted through the gap. Caleb moved next to him, using a metal hanger he had straightened into a wedge to adjust the frame just enough for better airflow. Smoke was pulling sideways now, instead of curling into their lungs. Physics, he knew, could bargain with death if you spoke its language with confidence. Rooker squinted, breath catching. "How do you know this?" Caleb didn't look away from the door. "You learn things when you spend time saving people you don't get to hate." Vega's radio crackled again. Words punched through static like lifelines. "Laundry, sit tight. Opening in. 2 minutes." 2 minutes could be a lifetime, or the end of one. The older CO stumbled, coughing so hard his whole body trembled. Caleb caught him before he dropped, placed him gently beside Rooker. "Head up. Breathe slow." The man choked out, What were you before this?" Caleb hesitated, a pause full of ghosts. Vega turned, listening. Rooker stared, scared to know. Caleb lifted his chin a fraction. "Combat medic." The words fell into the room like a flare illuminating every hidden truth. Men looked at him differently now, not as an inmate trying to survive, but a soldier trained to keep the dying alive. Silence crept into the corners, loosening fear's grip just enough. Vega swallowed hard and pressed the radio button. His voice steadied. "Be advised. Brooks is a trained medic. He's triaged and stabilized multiple..." Static cut him off, but the message had landed. Caleb checked the unconscious man again. Breathing, color returning. He moved to Rooker next, laying a palm against his chest, feeling for the tempo beneath skin. He tapped once, twice, then a third time. Slow, steady knocks, a rhythm of reassurance, a promise from a father to a son. Rooker stared at the hand on his chest like it was something holy. No taunt, no sneer. Just a man trying to understand why the hand that should hate him wasn't squeezing his throat shut. Caleb leaned close enough that only Rooker heard him. "Everyone gets to live today," he said, "even the ones who think they don't deserve to." Rooker's eyes glossed. Not tears, just the sting of air returning to places starved of mercy too long. The door's lock clicked. Boots thundered outside. A clang ran down the metal like lightning finding its path. Then the door cracked open a few inches and a blast of fresh air punched into the room. Rescue team faces appeared behind masks, urgent, prepared, alive. They saw Caleb kneeling over the injured, saw the order he'd dragged from chaos, saw a prisoner doing a professional's job with more grace than most professionals remembered to carry. The nurse in the lead froze, trying to solve the math in front of her. Masked eyes flicked to Caleb's improvised equipment. The airway cleared, the patients positioned correctly. "You triaged?" she asked, stunned. Caleb nodded. "No reds," he said quietly. "Not yet." The nurse blinked, then motioned her team forward. Rescue rushed in, pulling the injured toward daylight and oxygen. As Caleb stepped back, the room gathered around him, not physically, but in understanding. He felt dozens of eyes on him, searching for the man they missed entirely until now. No fists lifted, no insults hurled, just breathing. And that strange, reverent silence, reserved for moments when truth refuses to stay buried. He saved the racist who beat him. And seconds later, everyone went silent. Caleb wiped soot from his brow. His knees trembled, but his voice didn't. "Let's go," he said to the room that was still learning how to see him. The riot felt like a nightmare they had woken from too suddenly. Smoke still clung to the walls long after the alarm stopped screaming. Men coughed black into paper cups and wiped their faces like they were trying to erase what they'd seen. The laundry room was shut down and taped off, the floor scarred with scorch marks and water streaks that would never quite fade. Order returned, but not the same order. Something had shifted beneath the concrete. Warden Miles arrived on the tier, flanked by 2 lieutenants and a clipboard thick enough to make anyone nervous. The man moved carefully, as if the ground might crack if he stepped too hard. He didn't look like the type who enjoyed surprises, and today he had been handed far too many. His gaze skimmed down the line of inmates standing against the wall until it found Caleb. "You," he said, voice steady as an old courthouse bell. "Brooks, step forward." Caleb obeyed, hands behind his back, shoulders squared. Vega stood nearby, posture rigid, but eyes steadying him. Breen watched from the far corner, arms crossed, jaw tight enough to crack teeth. Rooker leaned against the wall, breathing easier now, but his expression stuck somewhere between shame and awe. Warden Miles flipped the top page of his notes. "Reports state that you organized the containment of smoke, administered medical attention, and instructed officers on appropriate emergency procedure." He looked up. "For the record, what is your background?" Caleb hesitated, then answered in the quietest way a truth can be spoken. "U.S. Army. Combat medic." The warden studied him like a man realizing he'd misjudged the weight of a stone before lifting it. "Then it appears this facility has severely misfiled your capabilities." Breen stepped forward too quickly. "Sir, Brooks was disciplined for violent conduct in service. Death of a civilian." Caleb didn't flinch. He'd heard that version of his life enough times to know the words by heart. But Vega spoke first. "That's not what happened." His voice shook, but he didn't look away. "I checked. Someone removed his commendations, his deployment history. His record was altered." A crack spread through the room. Silent, but everyone felt it. The warden narrowed his eyes. "Is that a fact, Officer Vega?" "Yes, sir." Warden Miles turned toward Breen. "Was this under your direction?" Breen opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Every excuse he'd ever leaned on seemed too thin now. The warden didn't wait for the lie to form. "Officer Breen, you are placed on immediate suspension pending investigation," Miles said coldly. "Turn in your badge and access card." Breen's face drained of color. He looked suddenly small, just a man who had built his authority on sinking sand. A lieutenant escorted him out as inmates stared, wide-eyed, learning that sometimes power actually answered for itself. The warden returned his attention to Caleb. "Follow me." They walked down a short corridor into an office that smelled of disinfectant and seriousness. The warden sat behind his desk, tapping a file against its surface as if forcing it to reveal more. "I've reviewed your legal status," he said. "Your appeal is active. Your lawyer has filed motions based on new statements from military personnel." He paused, then leaned forward. "You may not be here much longer." Caleb's hands clenched behind his back. Hope hurt worse than injury. He didn't trust it yet. "But while you are here," the warden continued, "I would be a fool not to use your training." He slid a form across the desk. "Peer Emergency Response Lead. You will train inmates in basic medical readiness. It will count toward your restitution hours." Caleb looked at the paper, but didn't touch it. "I don't want a title," he said softly. "I just want things to be fair." The warden nodded like he respected that answer more than any salute. "Then start with this." He offered a plastic bag with a phone extension card inside. "You have 5 minutes." Caleb didn't remember walking to the phone. One moment he was sitting across from the warden. The next, his fingers were shaking over the keypad, dialing a number he knew better than his own heartbeat. The ring clicked to life, as familiar as a childhood hymn. "Grandma's house," his mother's worn voice answered, breathless and hopeful. "Ma," he whispered. The word cracked in the middle. Oh, baby, she breathed. And in the background, a smaller voice scrambled across the room. Daddy? Eli gasped. Then, as if remembering, he tapped 3 soft knocks on the receiver. Knock, knock, knock. The sound hit Caleb square in the chest, a hammer made of love. I'm here, Caleb said, and for once it felt true. I'm right here. They had only minutes, but those minutes stretched wide enough to hold a world. Eli told him about school and his dog and how he was practicing breathing just like Daddy taught him. Caleb told him he was proud, more proud than the sky had stars. His mother stayed quiet, letting the two connect as if silence itself was a blessing she could offer. Then the automated voice counted down the final seconds. Caleb swallowed hard. 3 knocks, he whispered. On the other end, knock, knock, knock. The line went dead, but his pulse kept answering long after. Back in laundry, the air smelled cleaner. Machines hummed instead of screamed. Men worked quietly, glancing up when Caleb entered. Not gawking, not mocking, just thinking. Rooker stepped forward, awkward as a man wearing borrowed skin. He held something small in his palm, a carton of milk and a packet of peanut butter. Treasures in a place like this. I heard the nurse say something, Rooker muttered, eyes fixed on the floor. About airways. About breathing. His voice scraped the words, together clumsily. That was good, I guess. Caleb nodded once. A peace offering accepted doesn't need applause. Before leaving, Rooker added, barely audible, you ain't nothing. Not perfect, but progress. Vega met Caleb near the exit, hands in his pockets. Thanks for today, the young guard said. Caleb replied with a tired smile. Take care of yourself, too. The machines hummed. Sunlight, soft and late, tried its best to reach the floor, a place that once felt like a coffin now felt like a waiting room, somewhere between death and freedom. Caleb exhaled steady, for the first time without forcing it. Justice hadn't arrived yet, not fully, but the door was starting to open. Morning came softer, like the building was learning not to shout. The laundry room smelled mostly of detergent again, only a faint ghost of smoke in the corners. Men moved slower, not from fear, but from something that looked suspiciously like care. Vega propped the door open with a rubber wedge and didn't bark about it. Santi organized the bins without turning it into a performance. The old CO kept his hat off inside, as if he'd remembered a church rule from childhood and decided to obey it here. The machines hummed a steady chord. It was a small sound, but it sounded like a promise. Caleb arrived early and set his hands to work, not because he was scheduled, because it made the shape of the day friendlier. He folded towels with the same attention he'd give a wound. Corners true, pressure even, no wasted motion. The bandage on his palm was cleaner now. The cut had closed into a tidy line. Some hurts knew how to heal when you stopped picking at them. Others needed time and witnesses. Vega came in with a box under his arm, the kind that once held printer paper and now held hope dressed up as supplies. Warden wants your class to start today, he said. And the words came out almost cheerful, like he didn't quite know how to do cheerful yet, but wanted to try it on. We got gauze, tourniquets, those little triangle bandages nobody respects until they save a life. Caleb nodded and began setting up stations at the long tables, making islands in a sea that had recently decided not to drown men. Santi showed up first and claimed a spot up front, like a kid who suddenly believed school might finally be teaching something useful. Behind him drifted faces you wouldn't bet on. Rooker's second in command with his chin tucked down, a trustee from the kitchen still dusted in flour. 2 quiet men from the tier that always smelled like bleach and sorrow. Even Rooker appeared, hovering near the back, acting like he was only there because he got lost on his way to somewhere harder. "Hands on," Caleb said, when enough bodies filled the room to warm it without crowding it. "This is not a lecture. You learn with your fingers. You save with your calm." He demonstrated a tourniquet, slow enough for the older eyes to track every turn. Tight is right. Pain means it's working. Lie, and you lose a life. They practiced on rubber arms and each other. There were winces, a few jokes to loosen the jaws, a bit of grumbling when pride met instruction. Caleb corrected angles and pressure like a tailor correcting a suit. Respectful, precise. Vega moved among them with a clipboard he forgot to write on, too busy learning. When a bandage fell apart under a clumsy knot, Santi quietly retied it and pretended the other man had done it himself. The room noticed. Dignity was catching. Halfway through, a porter carried in a small padded envelope and set it on the table near Caleb. No return address, just a block of a boy's careful letters and a green dinosaur sticker in the corner. Caleb's mouth went dry. He recognized the world inside that stamp. He opened it with his thumb, slow because that was how you open living things. A paper star slid out, this one brighter, edges crisp from small determined fingers. Under it, a short note printed in marker. "Make sure your friend can breathe too." The handwriting marched like little soldiers across the line. There was a second star folded smaller, tucked behind the first, with a single word on one arm. Vega. Caleb held both stars in his palm, their weight absurd and perfect. The room kept moving, but he felt a hush inside himself that asked for permission to spill into the air. He didn't. Not yet. He raised his eyes and found Vega near the door, watching the class with a face he was still growing into. "For you?" Caleb said later, sliding the smaller star into Vega's hand, not in front of everyone, but not in secret either. "From my boy. He thinks men who help other men breathe should carry light in their pockets." Vega looked at the star like it was a badge you earned the hard way. He tucked it into his uniform above his heart. "Tell him I'll keep it where it can see," he said, voice roughening. By afternoon, the class had a rhythm. Pressure, patience, breath. Men who had never touched another man gently learned the difference between holding and hurting. Rooker stayed longer than pride told him to. When practice ended, he lingered as the room put itself back together. He approached Caleb with the caution of a man stepping onto a porch he didn't know was sturdy. "I ain't good with words," Rooker said, which was true and also a warning. He held out a small folded square of paper, the photo of Eli rescued from the floor days ago, its crease smoothed with someone else's thumb. "I kept it safe that night. Didn't figure it right to let it get trampled." Caleb took the photo. The dog still looked like it had bet on the right family. Eli's grin looked like it could muscle the clouds aside if asked politely. "Thank you," Caleb said, and put more into those two words than the room could hold. Rooker nodded too hard, like his neck needed to agree before his heart could. "That star thing," he added, eyes on the wall. "My old man used to beat hell out of us for waking him. Wish somebody'd taught us 3 knocks meant somebody on the other side gave a damn." There was a beat where the past and present tried to shake hands. Then Rooker cleared his throat, failed to find swagger, and settled for leaving. When count cleared, the warden made his rounds with Investigator Cole at his shoulder. A woman with reading glasses and the patience of someone who has seen lies shed their skins. She asked questions that didn't sound like accusations. She asked Breen to sign forms somewhere else. Later, a rumor twitched that charges were coming. Nobody cheered. Relief made quieter noises than victory. In the evening, the hum of machines gave way to a soft music someone had smuggled through a radio station that remembered church without asking for a sermon. Caleb finished wiping down tables and stood in the doorway. The corridor laid itself out like a long bruise healing from the edges inward. Vega walked past, tapping the star in his pocket like a habit forming. Santi jogged by with a contraband smile and an extra inhaler he'd bartered for, setting it carefully on Caleb's cart as if returning a relic. "For the kid," Santi said. "So he's got one at Grandma's and one for visiting day. 2 lungs, 2 inhalers." Caleb's laugh came out bent with gratitude. "He'll like that," he said. Rooker appeared one last time, pausing on the threshold. He held a carton of milk and the good peanut butter like a man who'd memorized the currency of apology and was trying to pay a bill that didn't print a total. He didn't meet Caleb's eyes. "Nobody here should stop breathing," he said, quiet and stubborn, like a man repeating a sentence until it fit in his mouth. "That's the idea," Caleb answered. The light softened as if a hand had finally found the right dimmer. Dust hung in the air golden for once, instead of gray. On the far wall, a square of sun lay bright as a folded sheet. Caleb set the letter back into his pocket, smoothed the photograph with the heel of his hand, and listened. The building had 1,000 ways to be loud. For the first time in a long while, it was choosing one of its few ways to be kind. He thought of the court that might soon call his name for the right reasons. He thought of a boy at a kitchen table practicing 3 soft knocks like scales on a piano, air moving easily in and out of small lungs. He thought of a nurse who had seen through smoke and called him what he was. He even thought of Breen, small now in a big system learning to recognize itself, and hoped the man would find a better uniform to put on next time, the kind you earn one decent decision at a time. Caleb turned off the sink and let the last thin stream of water run across his fingers. He could read the story of the day and the temperature alone. Hot, then warm, then good. He dried his hands, tucked in his shirt, and started toward the door. Santi's voice came from behind him, light as a good rumor. "Hey, Brooks, that star, what's it for again?" Caleb tapped his pocket where paper touched fabric and skin. "Reminds me what to do when a room forgets," he said. "What's that?" "Breathe slow, knock gentle, tell the truth." They walked out together, 2 silhouettes flattening against cinder block and evening. Somewhere far off, a radio found a station that knew how to be quiet before it sang. The door to the tier opened with a sigh instead of a shout. Vega stood aside and held it without thinking, the star over his heart catching the last light of the day. Caleb stepped through and paused, just long enough to let the moment take a shape that would fit into memory without tearing it. Respect didn't shout. It didn't carry a weapon or a title that demanded applause. It stacked itself quietly, fold by fold, breath by breath, until even a place built from keys remembered it was supposed to guard life, not strangle it. He touched the photo once more, then lifted his knuckles to the frame of the opening and gave it 3 soft taps, the old signal passing clean into the future. On the other side of the day, somewhere a boy answered back, "Knock, knock, knock." And for a long second, everyone, guards, inmates, steel, and the stubborn air, remembered how to be still. Then the world exhaled and went on, carrying a little more mercy than it had that morning.